David Mills was a man who preferred machines to people. For the past 8 years he had worked as a mechanic on Kepler 442b, a distant mining colony orbiting a red dwarf star. His job was simple: keep the ancient drilling equipment running. His life was simpler still: work, drink coffee, sleep, repeat. The colony sprawled across a frozen wasteland of crystalline canyons and mineral deposits. Most workers lived in the main compound, where they socialized and complained about their low wages. David lived in an isolated maintenance station, 5 kilometers away from everyone else. This was how he liked it. On the morning everything changed, David was on his 4th cup of cold brew coffee. He sat in his cramped office, staring at the diagnostic screens that monitored the mining equipment spread across the canyon system. The screens showed the usual data: drill temperatures, pressure readings, energy outputs. Nothing interesting. Nothing that required his attention. Then one screen flickered. A new energy signature appeared on the map, approximately 3 kilometers northeast of his station. The signature was unlike anything David had seen before. It was not from any human equipment. The readings suggested alien technology, but the energy output was weak and getting weaker. David stared at the screen for a long time. According to Consortium protocol, he should report this immediately to Administrator Cole, the man in charge of the entire colony. Reporting it was the smart thing to do. It was the safe thing to do. It was also the thing that would result in military teams swarming the area, quarantine procedures, endless paperwork, and David losing his peaceful job. He poured another cup of coffee instead. The strange energy signature bothered him though. In all his years on Kepler 442b, nothing interesting had ever happened. The monotony of his existence had become almost suffocating. A small, rebellious part of his mind suggested that investigating the signal might break up the boredom. Before he could think too hard about it, David grabbed his thermal suit and headed out into the frozen canyon. The journey took 90 minutes on foot. Kepler 442b's atmosphere was breathable but cold, always cold. Snow and ice covered everything. David's breath came out in white clouds as he navigated through the crystalline formations, following the coordinates from his handheld scanner. The signal got stronger as he walked. Then he saw it. The object was partially buried beneath a massive sheet of ice that had accumulated over what looked like months. It was small, perhaps the size of a human shuttle, with a sleek metallic hull that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. One entire side was scorched black, as if the craft had been exposed to tremendous heat. Large cracks spider-webbed across the hull. Whatever this thing was, it had crashed hard. David approached cautiously. He could see a transparent viewport on the craft's side. Through the reinforced glass he noticed something moving inside. Something small. Something alive. His heart started beating faster. David moved closer and wiped the frost from the viewport. What he saw made him freeze in place. Inside the craft lay a creature unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was no larger than a cat, with scales that shimmered in shades of blue and silver. The scales seemed to glow with their own soft light, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. The creature had 4 legs, powerful but thin. Its head was reptilian but somehow elegant, with sharp features and large eyes that were currently closed. It looked like a dragon. Not the fire-breathing monsters from ancient Earth legends, but a real alien version of one. The creature was barely moving. David could see its sides rising and falling with shallow breaths. A containment field surrounded the creature, but the field was flickering weakly. Its power was failing. Whatever this creature was, it was dying. David's mind raced. He knew better than to approach alien life forms. He knew the risks. He knew the regulations that prohibited any contact without proper authorization. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to walk away, to return to his station, to report this through proper channels. But something else was screaming too. Something older. Something human. This creature was alone. Was afraid. It was dying. And David could help it. He moved to the pod's entrance hatch and examined the locking mechanism. It was alien technology, but the basic principles were universal. Energy flowed through circuits. Pressure released through valves. Nothing too different from the mining equipment he repaired daily. After 20 minutes of careful work, using tools from his maintenance kit, David managed to manually override the seal. The hatch hissed open. Warm air escaped from inside, carrying strange scents David had no names for. He pulled himself inside the cramped space. The creature's eyes opened immediately. David found himself staring directly into large, intelligent eyes the color of molten silver. The creature's gaze was alert and aware. It was also desperate. For a moment, neither moved. Then the creature tried to lift its head, a movement that clearly took enormous effort. Its scales dimmed slightly, as if the small movement had drained what little energy remained. David knelt beside the creature. Up close he could see the injuries. One wing was bent at an unnatural angle. Dried blood crusted along its flank. The creature had been through terrible trauma. "Easy," David whispered, though he had no idea if the creature could understand human speech. "Easy. You're safe now." He checked the creature's vital signs using the pod's damaged medical scanner. The readings were bad. The creature's temperature was dropping. Its heart rate was irregular. Without medical intervention, it would be dead within hours. David thought about Administrator Cole. He thought about the protocol. He thought about his peaceful, quiet life on Kepler 442b. Then he picked up the creature carefully, cradling it against his chest. The creature's scales were cold and damp, but underneath he could feel a heartbeat, struggling but persistent. "All right," David said quietly. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He carried the creature back toward his station, never once looking back at the crashed pod. He had just broken every regulation the consortium had ever created. He had just committed what might be considered a serious crime. His simple, peaceful life had ended the moment he opened that hatch. But as he walked through the frozen canyon, holding the barely alive creature against his thermal suit, David Mills realized he had never felt more awake. David carried the creature back to his maintenance station, moving as quickly as the frozen terrain allowed. The creature remained unconscious, but its heart still beat against his chest. He had no idea what he was doing or what would happen next. All he knew was that this small, fragile thing was dying and he could not let that happen. His station was small but functional. It consisted of a main control room, a storage area filled with mechanical parts and tools, a small laboratory where he occasionally repaired sensitive equipment, and a cramped living quarters where he slept and drank coffee. It was not designed to house an alien life form, but David had spent years improvising solutions to impossible problems. He could improvise this too. He placed the creature on a workbench in the laboratory and removed the thermal suit from his upper body. The creature's scales were ice cold. David quickly gathered blankets and heat lamps, arranging them around the workbench to create a warm environment. He then connected the creature to the station's basic medical scanner, the same device he used to diagnose equipment failures. It was not designed for biological analysis, but it could at least give him basic readings. The scanner displayed numbers that meant nothing to David at first. Heart rate was dangerously low. Body temperature had dropped several degrees below what seemed normal. Something in the creature's chest area showed severe damage. David guessed it was from the crash, internal injuries that might have been fatal if they were not treated soon. He spent the next 3 hours at his computer terminal, accessing every medical database available on the station. Most of the information was designed for human anatomy, but David read through everything about trauma response, shock treatment, and basic life support. He improvised a solution using intravenous tubes originally designed for equipment coolant systems. He adapted them to deliver a nutrient solution into the creature's veins, something that might help stabilize its condition. By the time he finished, David had not slept in 24 hours. He was running on pure coffee and adrenaline. He collapsed into a chair beside the workbench and watched the creature breathe. "I do not even know what you are," David said quietly to the unconscious form. "And I just threw away my entire life for you." The creature did not respond. Its scales continued to pulse with that soft blue glow. Despite everything, despite the danger and the stupidity of his actions, David found the glow beautiful. He fell asleep watching it. When David woke 6 hours later, the creature's eyes were open. They were watching him. David's first instinct was to jump back, but something in the creature's gaze made him stay still. The eyes were intelligent. They were aware. They were afraid, but they were intelligent. "Hello," David said slowly. "Can you understand me?" The creature made a low chirping sound. Then its eyes closed again. It was not dead though. Its side still rose and fell with breath. Over the next week, David fell into a new routine. He would work the morning shift at the mining station, making sure the equipment kept running. He would file his normal reports with Administrator Cole, telling him everything was functioning properly. Then he would return to his quarters and spend the rest of his time caring for the creature. The creature's condition slowly improved. On day 3 it tried to stand. On day 5, it ate the processed meat David offered it, though the creature seemed to find the food strange. By day 7, the creature was moving around David's laboratory, exploring the space with cautious curiosity. David began calling it Ember, though he still had no idea what species it actually was or even if the name was appropriate. Ember seemed to respond to it though. When David said the name, the creature would turn toward him and chirp. On day 8, something extraordinary happened. David was working at his computer terminal when he felt a sudden vibration in his mind, like someone had plucked a string inside his brain. Images flooded into his consciousness. Memories that were not his own. He saw a vast spaceship, beautiful and graceful. He saw other creatures like Ember, larger ones with scales that blazed with colors David had no names for. He saw a war terrible and destructive. He saw destruction and death and desperate escape. Then he saw the crash. The escape pod tumbling through space. The impact with Kepler 442b surface. Darkness and cold and isolation. David gasped and pulled back from the terminal. His heart was racing. Ember sat nearby, scales pulsing brightly. The creature had somehow shared its memories with him. The creature was communicating. Over the following days, David learned more about Ember through these strange telepathic exchanges. Ember was young, barely more than a hatchling by the standards of her species. Her species was called the Drakkar. They had been peaceful traders and explorers, traveling between worlds in their beautiful ships. But something had changed. A hostile species called the Valerian Syndicate had begun hunting the Drakkar for reasons Ember did not fully understand. There had been a war. The Drakkar had tried to hide, to escape. But the Valorians were relentless. They had destroyed the Drakkar homeworld. They had hunted the survivors across multiple star systems. Ember's pod had been a desperate escape attempt by her mother, who had launched her daughter away from danger, hoping someone would find her and help her survive. Her mother had stayed behind. Ember did not know if her mother was alive or dead. David felt his heart break as he received these memories. This small creature had lost everything. Her entire civilization was scattered or destroyed. She was alone in a hostile galaxy, with no one to help her except a lonely mechanic who had just met her a week ago. "I will help you," David whispered. "I do not know how, but I will find a way." Ember moved closer and rested her head against David's chest. For the first time since the crash, the creature seemed calm. The blue scales pulsed steadily, peacefully. David sat there holding this last survivor of a destroyed species, understanding that his life had fundamentally changed. He was no longer just David Mills, the lonely mechanic. He was something new now. He was Ember's protector. And in caring for her, he had finally found something worth caring about. David had been keeping Ember hidden for 3 weeks when everything started to fall apart. He maintained his normal routine, working the mining equipment during the day and returning to his isolated station to care for the creature at night. No one suspected anything. The colony was large enough that people rarely paid attention to what the maintenance workers did, as long as the equipment kept functioning. Then David received an unexpected message on his communication terminal. It was from Dr. Rachel Harper, a salvage operator he had met years ago at a mining convention. They had shared a few drinks, exchanged contact information, and had remained casual friends ever since. Rachel operated an independent salvage ship, traveling between colonies and outposts, buying broken equipment and selling it for profit. The message was brief but urgent. Rachel was requesting a private communication channel. David felt his stomach tighten. He activated the secure connection. "David," Rachel's voice came through, clear and serious. "I need you to listen carefully. Something bad is happening in this sector." "What do you mean?" David asked, though part of him already knew. "Valerian ships," Rachel said quietly. 3 of them. They showed up 3 days ago and have been moving through the colony network, boarding merchant vessels, scanning stations. They are searching for something specific. They are very methodical about it. David's hands began to shake. "The Drakkar," he whispered. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You know about them?" "I have one," David admitted. "A young one. It crashed here about 3 weeks ago." Rachel cursed loudly. "David, do you understand what you have done? The Valorians have been systematically hunting the Drakkar for months. They want to complete what they started, to eliminate the entire species. If they discover that you have one, they will destroy everything to find it. They will destroy you. They will destroy the whole station if they have to." "What do I do?" David asked desperately. "Keep it hidden," Rachel said firmly. "Do not tell anyone. Do not let it leave your station. I am coming to you. I will be there in approximately 48 hours. We need to figure out a way to get you and that creature off this planet before the Valorians arrive." The connection ended before David could respond. He sat in his office, staring at the communication terminal, his mind racing. He thought about Administrator Cole, the man who ran the colony. Cole had always seemed competent but distant. David had never trusted him completely, but he had never suspected anything was wrong either. David pulled up the colony records and began searching through recent administrative files. He found something interesting. 3 weeks ago, just days after Ember's crash, there had been a large financial transaction. A significant amount of money had been transferred to Administrator Cole's personal account from an unknown source. The transaction was buried deep in the files, marked as routine maintenance fees, but the numbers did not add up. Someone had paid Administrator Cole to watch for something. Someone had paid him to report if anything unusual was discovered. David's worst fears were confirmed the next morning. Administrator Cole arrived at the maintenance station personally, which had never happened before in 8 years. He brought 2 security officers with him, both carrying weapons. Cole's face was calm and professional, but his eyes were cold. "David," Cole said pleasantly, "I need to conduct a routine inspection of this facility. Standard procedure. Nothing to worry about." David's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might explode. "Of course, Administrator. Everything is functioning normally." "I am sure it is," Cole replied. "But regulations require occasional inspections of remote stations. You understand." David led them through the facility. The 2 security officers looked at everything carefully. David showed them the main control room, the storage areas, the mechanical equipment. Everything looked normal. Nothing seemed suspicious. David had hidden Ember in a sealed equipment closet, disguising it as a malfunction in the temperature control system. If they opened that closet, everything would be lost. Cole moved through the station methodically, asking questions about equipment maintenance and operational status. His tone was friendly, but David could see the hunger in his eyes. Cole was looking for something. Cole knew something was here. Then one of the security officers noticed the sealed closet. He pointed at it and said something to Cole. David felt his chest tighten. "What is this?" Cole asked casually. "Damaged temperature control unit," David said, forcing his voice to sound calm. "It has been malfunctioning for weeks. I'm still trying to fix it. Nothing important." Cole moved toward the closet. "May I see it?" Before David could respond, an alarm suddenly blared through the entire station. The communication system activated automatically, broadcasting an emergency message across all frequencies. "Attention all personnel," a distorted voice broadcast urgently. "This is an emergency alert. Unidentified spacecraft entering the colony airspace. All personnel are to remain in secure locations. Security teams, report to defensive positions immediately." Cole's face changed. He looked at his security officers with confusion. "What is happening?" David realized what was occurring. Rachel had arrived early. She was creating a distraction, broadcasting some kind of fake emergency signal to disrupt Cole's inspection. "Administrator, we need to return to the main compound," one of the security officers said urgently. "If there is a genuine threat, you need to be protected." Cole hesitated for only a moment before nodding. He looked at David with suspicion. "We will return to this inspection later. For now, secure your station." They left quickly, moving toward their transport vehicles. David watched them go, his entire body trembling with relief and fear. He immediately opened the sealed closet. Ember emerged, scales flashing with agitation, clearly responding to the alarm. David picked up the creature and moved to his communication terminal. He activated the secure channel with Rachel. "Thank you," he said simply. "I created a false sensor reading," Rachel explained quickly. "It will buy you some time but not much. They will figure out it was a false alarm within an hour. David, you need to pack whatever you can carry. Meet me at coordinates I am sending now. We leave tonight." "What about my job? My life here?" "Your life here is over," Rachel said quietly. "If you stay, the Valorians will find that creature and they will kill you both. We are leaving in 8 hours. David looked at Ember. The creature looked back at him, her silver eyes full of trust and fear. She had survived the crash. She had survived weeks in hiding. She had survived having her entire species hunted to near extinction. She would not survive much longer on Kepler 442b. "We will be there," David said, and he ended the connection. He began packing everything he could carry. Most of his possessions meant nothing. But the files he had about Ember, the medical records he had gathered, the memories of what she had shared with him through their telepathic connection, these things he could not leave behind. As he packed, David realized he was no longer afraid. He was no longer the lonely mechanic who preferred machines to people. He had found something worth fighting for. The coordinates Rachel sent led to an abandoned maintenance depot on the far side of the mining canyon system, approximately 15 kilometers from David's station. Getting there would be dangerous. The Valerian ships were now visible on the colony's radar, and security patrols had increased across the entire outpost. David had to move carefully, using the network of tunnels beneath the mining equipment to avoid detection. He wrapped Ember in thermal blankets and placed her in a reinforced container. The creature was frightened but calm, as if she understood the danger. David packed his backpack with water, food rations, and the medical supplies he had gathered for Ember's recovery. Then he waited until the security patrols had passed his location, and he began moving through the darkness. The journey took 4 hours. David's legs burned with exhaustion by the time he reached the abandoned depot. Rachel's salvage ship was already there, hidden behind the massive mining equipment that towered like metal monuments in the frozen wasteland. The ship was not large, but it was built for speed and maneuverability. Rachel stood at the entrance, scanning the horizon with a handheld weapon. "Hurry," she said urgently. "We do not have much time." David climbed aboard the ship. Rachel sealed the hatch behind them, and within minutes the vessel's engines hummed to life. Through the viewport, David could see the mining colony in the distance, lights glowing against the dark horizon. It seemed impossible that he had spent 8 years in that place, that his entire life had been contained within that small settlement. Now he was leaving it all behind forever. But before they could reach escape velocity, alarms suddenly blared across Rachel's ship. Red warning lights flooded the cockpit. "They are here," Rachel breathed. "The Valerian ships." 3 massive war corvettes descended through the atmosphere like metal birds of prey. They were enormous, far larger than Rachel's salvage vessel. Their hulls were dark and angular, designed for combat. Within seconds they began broadcasting demands across all communication frequencies. "Surrender the Drakkar hatchling or we will destroy this entire colony," a distorted voice announced. "You have 10 minutes to comply." David felt his blood turn to ice. The Valorians were not bluffing. He could see weapon systems powering up on the war corvettes. They were serious about this threat. "We cannot fight them," Rachel said grimly. "We need to run." She pushed the salvage ship's engines to maximum thrust. The small vessel shot forward, racing toward the upper atmosphere. But the Valerian ships were faster. They moved to intercept, cutting off Rachel's escape route. Weapons fire erupted, brilliant flashes of energy lighting up the frozen landscape below. "They are forcing us back down," Rachel cursed. "They want to keep us pinned here." David looked at Ember. The creature's scales were pulsing with rapid, anxious light. Suddenly, David felt a surge of something in his mind. It was Ember trying to communicate, trying to tell him something. Images flooded into David's consciousness. Ember was showing him the Valerian ship's design. She was showing him their weaknesses. She was showing him their command frequencies and their communication protocols. Through their telepathic bond, Ember was sharing knowledge about the species that had hunted her people to near extinction. "Rachel," David said urgently. "The mining equipment. Can you fly close to it?" "What are you talking about?" Rachel asked, confused. "Just trust me. Fly toward the drill array. The big one. Maximum speed." Rachel hesitated only briefly before banking the ship sharply toward the massive mining drill that towered over the frozen canyon. The Valerian ships followed, firing constantly. Energy weapons tore through the station's exterior, creating explosions and fires that lit up the dark landscape. David moved to the ship's communication system. Using the knowledge Ember had shared with him, he began broadcasting on the Valerian command frequencies. He sent out false orders, contradicting signals, everything designed to confuse the enemy ship's targeting systems and navigation computers. At the same time, he transmitted a series of codes that Ember had embedded in his mind, codes that the Drakkar had developed specifically to disable Valerian technology. The effect was immediate and dramatic. One of the Valerian ships suddenly lost power to its weapon systems. A second ship's navigation computer malfunctioned, causing it to veer sharply to the left. The third ship managed to resist the interference, but its systems were clearly struggling. "Whatever you are doing, keep doing it," Rachel said. She maneuvered the salvage ship with incredible precision, flying directly toward the massive mining drill. As they approached, Rachel suddenly cut the engines. The ship dropped like a stone, falling beneath the Valerian ship's line of fire. David continued transmitting the Drakkar codes, flooding the enemy communication channels with interference and false data. The Valorians were powerful, but they were also relying on automated systems. Those systems were being overloaded by information they could not process. Then David realized Rachel's plan. She was not trying to escape. She was trying to ram the crippled mining equipment into one of the Valerian ships. "Rachel, what are you?" David started. "Hold on," Rachel interrupted. She fired up the ship's engines again and aimed directly at the damaged drill array. The massive metal structure, already weakened by weapons fire, collapsed under its own weight. As it fell, Rachel's ship shot beneath it, using the falling debris as a shield. One of the Valerian ships could not move fast enough. The massive drill array crashed directly into its hull, tearing through the ship's exterior. Explosions erupted across the Valerian vessel as critical systems were damaged. The ship began to descend, trailing smoke and fire as it crashed toward the frozen surface below. The other two Valerian ships broke off their attack and moved to protect the damaged vessel. They were no longer focused on Rachel's ship. "Now we run," Rachel said, pushing the engines to maximum power. The salvage ship shot upward toward the upper atmosphere, leaving the chaos behind. Within minutes, they had achieved escape velocity and were heading away from Kepler 442b. David collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, exhausted and shaking. Through the viewport he could see the mining colony below, now engulfed in flames. His entire world was burning. But Ember was alive. Rachel was alive. And they were free. In the distance, the three Valerian ships were attempting repairs, clearly deciding not to pursue. They had suffered significant damage in the battle. They would need time to recover. David reached over and gently touched Ember's container. Through their bond, he felt the creature's relief and gratitude. The small Drakkar had saved them all. "We are not done yet," Rachel said quietly from the pilot's seat. "But at least we bought ourselves some time." David nodded, watching the stars stretch out before them as the ship jumped into hyperspace. His old life on Kepler 442b was gone forever. But something new was beginning. The outer colonies existed in the spaces between law and chaos. They were settlements built on abandoned asteroids, derelict space stations, and moons that no major government claimed. People came here to disappear, to start new lives, to escape their pasts. Rachel's salvage ship arrived at one such colony, a settlement called New Haven, 6 months after fleeing Kepler 442b. New Haven was built inside a hollowed-out asteroid. The interior had been carved into multiple levels, with habitation modules, storage facilities, and markets spread throughout the rock's interior. The colony had no official government, no laws, and no military. People here traded freely, asked few questions, and minded their own business. It was the perfect place to hide. Rachel rented a small residential unit on the lower levels. David and Ember would stay there while Rachel figured out their next move. The first thing David did was establish a routine. Every morning he would wake up and prepare coffee. It was an old habit from his mining days and it brought him comfort. He would sit by the small window of their quarters, watching the artificial lights of the colony's interior, and drink his coffee while Ember rested nearby. 3 months into their stay at New Haven, Rachel arrived at their quarters with a strange expression on her face. She looked excited and nervous at the same time. "I have been spreading word across the salvage and trader networks," Rachel explained. "I have been careful, using coded messages, hiding the information in shipping manifests and repair logs. I have been telling people that the Drakkar still exist, that there is a young one alive and safe." David felt his heart begin to beat faster. "Why would you do that?" "Because," Rachel said, moving to the window, "I was not sure if there were any other survivors. But apparently there are." She activated a communication device and showed David a series of messages. They were brief, encrypted, and vague. But the meaning was clear. Other Drakkar were reaching out. Other survivors had heard the rumors. They were emerging from hiding, revealing themselves after years of isolation. A Drakkar named Kale made contact first. Through encrypted messages, Kale explained that she had been hiding on a derelict station in the Epsilon sector for 5 years. When she heard that a young hatchling had survived, she wept. She had thought all the children had been lost. Then others reached out. A male Drakkar named Soren had been working as a slave on a mining colony, hiding his true identity. A female named Lyra had been living with human traders, pretending to be a rare animal. An elderly Drakkar named Thorn had been alone on an asteroid for 7 years, thinking he was the last of his kind. One by one the survivors began to emerge. They were scattered across hundreds of worlds and stations, separated by vast distances of space. But they were alive. The Valerian genocide was incomplete. Ember was the catalyst that brought them together. When the young Drakkar learned that there were others like her, that her species had not been completely destroyed, her scales blazed with a brilliance that filled the entire residential unit with blue and silver light. David felt her joy and hope through their telepathic bond. For the first time since her crash, Ember was no longer alone. David realized that he was no longer alone either. He had come to Kepler 442b seeking isolation, trying to escape human connection. Now he found himself at the center of something larger than himself. He was helping to restore an entire species. Over the following months, David worked with Rachel to coordinate a new settlement. They found an abandoned mining colony on a moon called Refuge Prime. The colony had been abandoned 30 years earlier when the mineral deposits ran out, but the infrastructure remained intact. With Kale's help, they began sending supplies and equipment to the settlement, preparing it for habitation. David took charge of the mechanical and technical systems. He worked with the surviving Drakkar to repair the colony's equipment and establish sustainable systems for long-term habitation. The work was difficult and constant, but it gave David purpose. Every system he repaired, every problem he solved, brought the Drakkar one step closer to having a home again. The first group of survivors arrived at Refuge Prime 4 months later. Kale and Soren came first, along with Lyra and 5 other Drakkar David had not yet met. They descended from the transport ship and stood on the frozen surface of Refuge Prime, looking at the colony structures with wonder and emotion. For many of them, it was the first time in years that they had felt safe enough to show their true forms without fear. David watched them from the colony's main observation deck. Ember stood beside him, her scales pulsing with warm, steady light. The young Drakkar had grown significantly over the past year. She was no longer a fragile hatchling. She was becoming strong and capable, a symbol of her species' resilience and determination to survive. "Your mother would be proud," David said quietly, speaking to Ember through their bond. Through their connection, Ember shared her response. She did not know if her mother had survived the war. She did not know if she would ever see her mother again. But she knew that her mother had loved her enough to send her away, to give her a chance at survival. And that love had led to this moment, where her entire species was rebuilding itself on a new world. David returned to his quarters and prepared another cup of coffee. This time he sat down with the other survivors. They gathered around a simple table, humans and Drakkar together, sharing a meal and talking about the future. Kale asked about David's life before Kepler 442b. Soren expressed gratitude for David's role in coordinating their rescue and resettlement. Lyra, who had spent years hiding among humans, marveled at how quickly David had accepted Ember and her kind. "I was lonely," David explained simply. "I thought I wanted to be alone forever. But then I met Ember and I realized that isolation was not peace. It was just emptiness. When you care about someone, when you are part of something larger than yourself, life has meaning." As the conversation continued, David looked around the table at the faces of the Drakkar, each one a survivor with their own story of loss and endurance. He thought about the mining colony on Kepler 442b, burning behind them as they escaped. He thought about Administrator Cole, whose betrayal had nearly destroyed them all. He thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. A lonely mechanic had found a dying creature in the ice. That single act of compassion had set in motion a chain of events that had brought a hunted species back from the brink of extinction. One human's choice to care had changed everything. Outside the window of the colony, the stars burned cold and distant. But inside, surrounded by warmth and companionship, David Mills no longer felt afraid. He had found his place in the galaxy. He had found his purpose. And every morning he would still wake up and make coffee, sharing it with Ember and the other survivors, grateful for the second chance life had given him. In the darkness of space, on a frozen moon called Refuge Prime, hope had taken root. And it was growing stronger every day.